You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's Friday, April 19th. I'm Camille Peterson.
And I'm Maggie Green. The city's rent laws are expiring this spring, as they do every 4 years. This time, tenants are fighting back.
It is a river of housing justice, and like the choir said, you ain't seen nothing yet.
A look at a new investment program that will fund women-led startups, but it'll take more than money to bridge the gender gap.
How much self-doubt we have, that holds us back.
Speaking of bridging the gap, New York has more than 17,000 bridges, and they're not making the grade.
The New York State report card rated the bridges as a D+, and nationwide we have about a C+.
And the Mueller report is out. We find out what the New York State Attorney General can and can't do with its findings. All that and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Stephanie Horton. The police officer injured yesterday in a Washington Heights shootout left the hospital this morning to bagpipes and roaring applause from his fellow officers.
Justin, how you doing, Justin?
Officer Justin Vartanian left St. Luke's around 11 a.m. holding his wife's hand. The incident injured the officer and left one suspect dead. The name of the shooting victim has not yet been released. We'll have more on the incident after this newscast. As of last night, the number of confirmed measles cases in New York City since October has reached 359. According to the CDC, that's the largest outbreak in the country. Last week, the city ordered families in certain Brooklyn zip codes to vaccinate, or they could face a $1,000 fine. Some sued the city, saying the order violated their First Amendment rights. But today, a judge upheld the city's ruling. New York City shoppers will soon have to pay 5 cents for paper bags. That begins March 2020, along with the ban on plastic bags. City council members voted yesterday to impose the fee to encourage shoppers to bring reusable bags. The death of a Brooklyn infant was declared a homicide today. The father of 6-month-old Gianni Gilmore was officially charged with the boy's death. It was determined the child died from shaken baby syndrome almost 1 year ago. The price of a 30-day Metro card is going up by $6 this Sunday. A 7-day card will cost $1 more, but the cost of a single ride will stay the same at $2.75. The Yankees have decided to suspend the use of the late singer Kate Smith's rendition of God Bless America during their traditional 7th-inning stretch. The singer used racist language in a 1939 song. This afternoon, the Long Island Railroad will run 8 extra trains out of Penn Station for riders who wish to leave work early to observe Good Friday and Passover. It's 72 degrees outside and partly cloudy. Heavy rain is expected early tomorrow morning. A flash flood watch is currently in effect until tomorrow afternoon. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Stephanie Horton.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Maggie Green.
And I'm Camille Peterson. A redacted version of the Mueller report was released to Congress and the public yesterday. Here's Attorney General William Barr on the report's findings.
The special counsel confirmed that the Russian government sponsored efforts to illegally interfere with the 2016 presidential election, but did not find that the Trump campaign or other Americans colluded in those efforts.
Paul Nolet is a political scientist at Marquette University. He researches the legal and political power of state attorney generals, and he's been following what the Mueller report means for the New York Attorney General. Paul Nolet, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What did we learn from the redacted report?
One key thing that we learned is that there actually was quite a bit more going on that the Mueller team found than what Attorney General Barr had said when he first gave his summary of the report. The team found quite a bit of evidence that other institutions now, including Congress and perhaps the New York Attorney General, can now run with.
Could you tell me more about what that means for the New York Attorney General?
This report is really long, but it was focused on the original task of the investigation, which was to explore whether there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the government of Russia. However, in the course of that investigation, it really went out into a bunch of different directions where they were exploring financial ties that Donald Trump had and perhaps still continues to have, as well as the Trump Organization. I think that evidence and what the Mueller team found touches upon issues that the New York AG could have quite a bit of discretion in going after.
How active has the New York Attorney General been in pursuing cases against the president?
I'd say pretty active. The current AG, Tish James, has issued subpoenas to a number of banks, Deutsche Bank, for instance, to try to get more information about Donald Trump's financial dealings. That was relatively recent, maybe in the last month or so. So it's an indication that she is going to be aggressively following up on a number of the perhaps questionable financial dealings that may lead to potential civil and perhaps criminal liability down the road.
What are the differences between how Mueller's team could investigate President Trump and how the New York State Attorney General can pursue cases?
In many ways, the New York AG is a lot freer to investigate Donald Trump, despite the fact that it's a state-level position as opposed to a federal-level position. And the reason for that is that Mueller was constrained by internal U.S. Department of Justice rules. And, of course, Mueller could have been fired at any time. It would have caused a lot of political controversy, but he could have been fired. Whereas Donald Trump can't fire Tish James. I mean, she's going to be there regardless of whether Donald Trump likes it or not, because, of course, she's elected by the people of New York.
What are the limits she may run up against as she investigates President Trump?
I think the big thing is going to be potential issues of executive privilege, which is a claim by the president that certain documents or other types of evidence can't be turned over to a court or to a prosecutor because of the sensitivity of the material. Certainly, I wouldn't be surprised if the administration starts making aggressive claims of executive privilege against a state institution like the New York AG's office. So I think that's going to be a big fight in the coming months and years.
What should we be watching for as investigations into President Trump continue?
A lot of these investigations happen behind closed doors. However, whenever the AG's office issues subpoenas or files a legal document in open court, then those sorts of details get publicized, and I think that will give us a clue about where the institution is going, especially if the administration starts making executive privilege claims against the New York AG's office. Then you know that the chances are that they're getting close to something that perhaps the administration is worried about.
Paul Nolet, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
If you're a renter in New York City, there's about a 50-50 chance your apartment is rent stabilized. But the laws that outline protection for renters expire every 4 years.
When they do, New Yorkers lobby the state legislature. Tenants want to expand renter protections. Landlords want to reduce them. As the bills come up again this spring, both sides are fighting to get their way. Allie Swenson reports.
Gloria Nieves is standing in the courtyard of her big brick apartment building in Queens. She says she and her neighbors aren't happy.
Oh, God. Water leak, gas leak, making people suffer.
Nieves has lived in her rent-stabilized apartment for almost 2 decades, but she's not sure how much longer she can stick around. She says the heat and hot water are always going out, and her landlord doesn't respond to her repair requests. So she decided to join a tenants union.
I pray and get more energy to continue fighting. You know, it's like they charge my battery.
When asked about Nieves' building, her landlord, Silver Shore Properties, responded with a statement that tenant complaints aren't the whole story. The company says it often buys neglected buildings, and when it does, their problems come with them. And those problems aren't always quick to fix. But if activists have anything to say about it, this relationship between tenants and their landlords could change soon.
It is a river of housing justice, and like the choir said, you ain't seen nothing yet.
That's State Senator Zelnor Myrie in front of a packed church in Harlem. He's rallying for a platform lawmakers are calling universal rent control. After speeches, the crowd spills out to march through the streets with huge banners and musical instruments. Democrats have a majority in the state Senate for the first time in a decade, so tenant advocates hope this might be the year to seriously strengthen renter protections. Myrie and his colleagues are trying to pass a total of 9 bills. The bills would close loopholes that let landlords raise rents when tenants leave or when they renovate apartments. Another bill would expand New York City's rent regulations to the entire state.
Your protections as a tenant should not be dependent on your zip code.
But tenant advocates aren't the only ones ready to take advantage of rent laws expiring.
Albany's plan means that my costs will be higher than what I take in.
A group with ties to real estate interests in the city is running ads like this one, featuring a landlord in the lobby of the building she owns.
I'm not sure how long I can hold on to these buildings and still do right by my tenants.
Bill Emick is a former New York State housing commissioner. He says both tenants and landlords like the opportunity to revisit rent laws every 4 years.
There's kind of a confluence of interest that if we keep revisiting this, we can move the needle more toward our side of the equation.
But despite the political shifts at the Capitol and the energy of tenant groups this year, Emick says changes to the rent laws will probably happen the way they usually do, with a lot of small, behind-the-scenes negotiations.
It's not all or nothing. We have a whole body of laws that are in place. You end up with both sides having issues, so it becomes a trade.
Lawmakers in Albany have until June 15th to debate. Allie Swenson, Columbia Radio News.
We often hear commuters complaining about the subway, but New Yorkers depend on many different kinds of transportation: buses, bikes, tunnels, and bridges. Millions of drivers cross bridges in New York State every day. As Lauren Lantry finds, like the MTA, New Yorkers' bridges have a lot of problems.
The two stone towers at either end of the Brooklyn Bridge are massive. The bridge is over a mile long, and it's hung with hundreds of thick metal cables. But even though it appears to be strong, the bridge has some problems.
So we're standing on some wooden planks that almost remind me of a very bad pier in Los Angeles, where it's been kind of eroded by weather.
Melanie Carlisle is an expat living in Berlin, and she's here to see tourist sites like the Brooklyn Bridge. As cars drive underneath, the planks she's standing on shake a little.
I'm taken back to my days in California, where it feels like a small earthquake every 5 or 6 seconds. And that's a little unnerving, quite honestly.
Ask a structural engineer, and they'll tell you extreme shakiness, reminiscent of earthquake tremors, is a symptom of age. And the Brooklyn Bridge was built back in 1869. Another common effect of age? Structural deficiency. That's the most recent rating the bridge received from the U.S. Department of Transportation. That doesn't mean the bridge is going to collapse tomorrow, but it does mean there might be serious issues, like cracking in the superstructure, and that could lead to eventual collapse. New York State has more than 17,000 bridges. Andrew Herman is a past president of the American Society of Civil Engineers. He says bridges get graded in a way we're all familiar with.
The New York State report card rated the bridges as a D+, and nationwide we have about a C+.
A D+ means New York's bridges are barely passing. Every 2 years, all bridges in the U.S. are inspected and ranked. 9 is the best, and 0 means you should get off that bridge now. Get a 4 or less, and it's structurally deficient. According to the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Brooklyn Bridge is one of more than 47,000 across the U.S. that are structurally deficient. And Herman says that means big consequences.
I mean, we waste hours sitting in traffic. We can see the consequences of failing infrastructure. They play out every day.
Herman says structurally deficient bridges cause traffic. That's because you can't just entirely shut down a crossing as busy as the Brooklyn Bridge to upgrade roads and make repairs. So, cities are forced to block off individual lanes, which causes that traffic and creates a bad cycle. Idling cars release emissions, and emissions erode bridges. And it gets worse. Herman says we can put a price on the gas we use during traffic and the lost time we spend while stuck.
You're talking about $700 per driver in New York City. That's what it costs each year to a driver due to the congestion we have already. We're talking about New York City area drivers wasting 53 hours per year just sitting in traffic.
Repairing bridges is not only time-consuming, it's also expensive.
The deck here is $300 million just to replace a deck. Yeah. So it's a lot of money.
Michelle Gosen teaches bridge engineering at the City College of New York. Gosen says building a new bridge is often cheaper than paying for ongoing repairs, like fixing the deck or the roadway of the Brooklyn Bridge. But building a new bridge in New York City could cost taxpayers over $3 billion. That's billion with a B. And he says there's another problem. Politicians hold the purse strings, but no politician wants to be the one to raise taxes, especially if a bridge won't be built within his or her term limits.
So there is this tendency to postpone. And again, you have to have the foresight in order to put the effort so that not to get to a point where we have major disasters.
Repairs of the Brooklyn Bridge are ongoing. It's due to be graded again this year. As for the country's bridges, in 2018, the Trump administration offered $200 billion in federal funds, but that has to cover all infrastructure projects. And civil engineer Andy Herman says that's not enough. It'll take $171 billion to repair the country's bridges. Lauren Lantry, Columbia Radio News.
While the country's bridges may be underfunded, according to a recent report, one transit system in New York is swimming in government cash. For every passenger on the New York City's ferry system, the city provides a $10 subsidy. Subway riders, meanwhile, only get $1 each.
This gap has concerned city council members. It turns out no one seems to know who's benefiting from these subsidies. Moira Warburton takes us to a ferry terminal in the Bronx.
The Soundview Ferry Terminal at Classen Point is in a quiet, residential part of the Bronx. The ferry route opened last August. It starts here, has a couple stops on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and lands near the bottom of Wall Street. Jason Soto works as an information manager at UNICEF. He's been taking the ferry to his job in Manhattan for the last 3 months.
I'm a happy person now that when I get to work, I get relaxed. There's always seating. You know, you get the view, the water. You know, the sound of the ferry is a little, but I don't mind that.
Compared to Soto's old 2-hour schlep on the subway, the ferry is a huge upgrade. A kiosk on board sells beer, wine, the kind of organic chips and energy bars you'd find in a Whole Foods. There's even eye masks for sale, although the clerk says they haven't sold any of those in the few weeks they've been carrying them. All this costs riders the same $2.75 as the subway. Keeping ticket prices low was part of the plan when the city launched the ferry system 3 years ago. When he opened a new ferry line last year, Mayor de Blasio said this is the best way to serve low-income neighborhoods with few transit options.
One of the central ideas of NYC Ferry was to open up opportunity, to connect people to jobs, to connect people to education, to give them a chance to get around their own city in ways they just don't have right now.
But these new routes come with a cost. The city provides over 10 times the subsidy per passenger for the ferry that it does for each subway ride. At a committee meeting earlier this week, Councilmember Antonio Reynoso, who represents Williamsburg and Bushwick, raised concerns about which communities the subsidy actually serves. He questioned James Katz of the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Katz's organization is in charge of the ferry
Those
system.
folks that are probably commuting to the financial district probably have decent pay, I guess.
I mean, I don't know that we know that to be true. I guess
All right,
that's
so
your
that's
point
pretty
about
much the point. Can we get that information so that we can have a serious discussion about where we're prioritizing the subsidies that the city is giving related to transportation?
The concern is that the people riding the ferries and benefiting from the subsidies are not the low-income people Mayor de Blasio had in mind. Ben Fried is at the Transit Center, a New York-based think tank that advocates for improved public transit. To him, it's less of a question of demographics and more one of funding
The whole ferry network
priorities.
carries fewer people than a single bus route in the Bronx. By using city resources to speed up buses, you're just improving transit for a lot more people than you are by running these ferries.
But for the people taking the ferry, it's about the quality of life. Linda Torres is a medical assistant from the Bronx who was on the ferry from
I gave up
Southview this
working in
morning.
Manhattan because of the commute. I stood in the Bronx for many years, and then when the ferry came, I said, I'm back. I went back to the city.
Torres is exactly the kind of person de Blasio was hoping to help. But right now, it's unclear how many ferry passengers are in the same boat as Torres. The Economic Development Commission has yet to make demographic information public. Moira Warburton, Columbia Radio News.
Yesterday, a suspect was shot and killed by police during a shootout in Washington Heights. When a shooting occurs, there are impacts throughout the neighborhood. Reporters Cynthia Betubisa and Maggie Green were on the scene to document its ripple effect.
Helicopters hovered above the scene at Broadway and 187th Street.
Yellow police tape cordoned off the intersection, stopping traffic and forcing commuters to take detours.
They had made us get off the bus because the bus is going no further. I'm just trying to get home, which is past here.
Here's what happened. At around 4:30 yesterday afternoon, police responded to a 911 call. According to the caller, a man had a gun. Officers spotted him and chased him into a parking lot. The suspect fired at police, and police shot back.
There was a gunfight inside that parking lot over there, and then I was like, boom, shots, and then I started looking out the window. I'm like, oh my God, what the hell is going on here?
That was Hamia Kolgman. He watched the shooting happen from his window across the street.
And before I know it, there's like 40 cops storming the building, running into the parking lot there.
One officer was shot in the armpit and was released from the hospital today. The suspect was shot in the chest and died. At a press conference last night, the NYPD broke down video from the incident.
In time, as this investigation goes forward, you will see a video where we have a police officer's shots, and by the dozens, fellow police officers continue to run into that parking lot with rounds whizzing past their head. No concern for their own danger, their own safety, they ran anyway. So when we say we run towards danger, realize we really do.
When a shooting happens, it affects an entire neighborhood. About an hour after the shooting, residents were still gathered at the scene, some talking on their phones, reporting back what they heard, what they saw, and what they thought happened. Ronaldo Colombani was nearby when the shooting happened.
And my mother and I were walking there, so they stopped us from going there. And all you saw was a bunch of cops going all around to find out what happened over there. So
Lady Tejada was leading an after-school program across the street in an elementary school when the shots were fired.
We had to do a shelter in for the after-school program. It's when they don't allow any person coming into the building or outside of the building.
Eliana Cuevas is a student at the school. She heard the shots.
So they put all of us in inside the school for we could be safe, but I know that something was happening around here, so I heard a shooting.
A shooting sets off a specific chain of events according to the official NYPD handbook on crime scenes. First, a physical barrier is created. Usually, that's the yellow tape you often see. Police create only one entrance. That way, each person who comes in and each person who leaves is registered in a log. They do this because they don't want to contaminate evidence. And the neighborhood is put on high alert.
I was up in my apartment, and I have an application called Citizen App. Basically, I got an alert saying that there was a guy with a gun, and not 2 minutes later, I heard about 5 gunshots go off.
Police say they are continuing to investigate. They plan to look at all of the body cam and security footage from the scene. From Columbia Radio News, Cynthia Betibiza.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Camille Peterson.
And I'm Maggie Green. The biggest buildings in New York are also big polluters. About a third of New York's greenhouse gas emissions come from just 4% of the city's largest towers. Yesterday, the city council passed a new package of bills requiring large buildings to slash their greenhouse gas emissions by 40% in 10 years and then 80% by 2050. But the package, known as the Climate Mobilization Act, doesn't specify how these buildings could reach this goal. David Sue teaches in urban and environmental planning at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. David, hello.
Hi, Maggie.
Thanks so much for joining us today. So, as we saw yesterday, there's still a lot of work to be done in New York City, especially from the legislation we saw passed, and especially in these buildings that are over 25,000 square feet. So, say that I own one of these buildings. What's the first concrete step that I could take to reduce emissions in my building?
First step you can take, or you probably already are taking this last year, is the city's been benchmarking its buildings for almost a decade, about 6 or 7 years.
Wow.
And so benchmarking is simply where you simply record all the energy bills of your building. You enter them into a database or a website, and then the city probably sends you a report already telling you not only how your building scores versus other buildings, and also how much energy your building is using compared to other buildings. But actually, that's a great source of actionable information.
So what are some of those actions that you recommend?
Some of the things are already mandated. Retrocommissioning is pretty much a no-brainer, according to the academic literature and studies that have been done.
What is retrocommissioning?
Yeah, retrocommissioning is basically when an engineer comes into your building and tunes up the systems. And the reason why you do that is because, just like a car, if you operate it every day, things get a little bit out of trim or out of alignment. And so you have a mechanic come into your building and tune up all the systems to make sure the car is operating as efficiently as it could, or in this case, a building.
Gotcha. So if something isn't operating as efficiently as possible, it might be using more energy than it needs to.
That's right, and you can reduce your energy use by 20 to 25% on average for most buildings, simply by having this retrocommissioning done more frequently.
Another bill in this package would require that all new developments have solar panels or green roofs. And a few other cities like Toronto, San Francisco, Portland have already put this kind of law into place. What are some of the changes that those cities have seen since those laws were put in place?
California has required new solar on all new residential construction, I think, in the state. I don't know about San Francisco and Toronto in particular. It's a little bit hard to see, for me, how that's going to have as a big effect as retrocommissioning, if only because New York City buildings don't have a lot of roof space compared to other buildings.
So the Real Estate Board of New York represents a lot of these building owners that own these largest skyscrapers in the city. And they say that they support the city's plan to reduce emissions by 40% by 2030, but they're skeptical that this particular plan passed by City Council yesterday will work. Is it possible for the city to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% in just 10 years?
People just don't know how much energy they're using. People who are more aware of their energy use are suddenly starting to use less energy simply because they want to save money. People want to be selling a more efficient building compared to all the buildings in the marketplace. So in that sense, I'm actually, after having read the legislation over, I'm not actually as skeptical as the building industry is necessarily that this is going to be, I think it'll be difficult to achieve. I don't think it's impossible to achieve.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
We often look to our names to tell us more about ourselves. In this commentary, reporter Stephanie Horton finds a purpose in the letters that spell out who she is.
Every time I write my name, I tell a lie. My signature is my initials, SH. It's the exact same signature as my dad. He's very particular. He only uses a blue fountain pen, but his name is also a lie. He's not related to anyone named Horton, and that means neither am I. My dad was the oldest of 7 boys. His dad, Ralph Horton, wasn't really his dad. His biological father ran off when my dad was a baby, and his mom never thought to mention it to him when he got older. Ralph Horton once tried to feed my grandma gasoline in a soda can to cause a miscarriage. So yeah, pretty gross. When my dad was 8, the man my dad knew as his father died. My dad doesn't remember feeling sad. He remembers trying to hide a smile while the casket was lowered into the ground. He said that made him feel like a monster. He left home as soon as he turned 18 to study engineering, and he took the Horton name with him. Growing up, I had a best friend named Emily Gold. I loved her name, solid and fluid at the same time. It was so beautiful you could almost hear it shine. She would talk about going to her grandmother's house on Sundays to help her pipe fluffy white frosting on cakes. I never had stories like that, so instead I would offer to braid her straight auburn hair. She kept talking. I imagined having grandparents who would sit and tell me stories about their idyllic childhoods, helping me ice beautiful cakes as they complained about how much I take everything for granted. Emily Gold didn't have that much hair, so before long I would regretfully leave our one-sided conversations and head back to the Horton household. The name of my family felt shameful, a short, dull, dingy history with nothing to be proud of, and I wanted to be done with it. I couldn't take my mom's name. Her past was just as troubling. No point in trading one lousy name for another. So one day when I was 10 years old and sporting fuzzy princess pajamas, I marched up to my dad and I told him I want to change my name. He glanced up from the paper, and his wire glasses were almost dangling from his nose. He asked why. Because I'm not really related to anyone named Horton. He said, "You're related to me." He raised his paper slightly to keep reading. Well, that was that. I walked away. My dad spent his Saturdays teaching me his secret pancake recipe and taking me to book sales so we could spend Sundays reading dusty books side by side on the couch. I challenge you to think of a more perfect weekend. I realized my parents had taken their lineage into their own hands. That's the Horton way. At least it is now. Since then, I've always signed my name like my dad. Same initials, same style.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us. You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Maggie Green.
And I'm Camille Peterson. 1 in 5 kindergartners in New York is overweight. A school in East Harlem is trying to change that.
And today, reporter Sachi McClendon visited the International Car Show to find the latest in automotive tech.
These stories and more coming up. But first, these headlines.
From Columbia Radio News, I'm Shannon Lin. Congressional Democrats issued a subpoena to the Justice Department today. They want Special Counsel Robert Mueller's unredacted report and the underlying evidence and testimonies Mueller gathered. Gerald Nadler is the Democratic chairman of the Judiciary Committee.
I have formally requested that the Special Counsel Mueller testify before the House Judiciary Committee as soon as possible so we can get some answers to these critical questions, because we clearly can't believe what Attorney General Barr tells us.
The 400-page report redacted details including active criminal cases. Mueller did not find that Trump obstructed justice, but also did not exonerate him. Sudanese soldiers and protesters shot bullets into the air yesterday in Khartoum. They gathered outside the Ministry of Defense. Since the ousting of former President Omar al-Bashir, Sudan has been ruled by a military council. Protesters are now pushing for a rapid transition to civilian leadership. In California, a federal appeals panel rejected a lawsuit filed by the Trump administration. The suit claimed that state was violating federal laws protecting immigrants who are in the U.S. illegally. A new report says journalists in the U.S. are less safe. According to Reporters Without Borders, the United States has dropped 3 ranks lower in the World Press Freedom Index. The report points to President Trump's increasingly hostile treatment of journalists as reasons for the change. Today is Good Friday. Pope Francis washed and kissed the feet of prisoners in a town near Rome. This marked the 5th time he's performed the service of forgiveness and penance since 2013. For Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Shannon Lin.
Many immigrant children come to the United States after leaving dangers or abuse in their own countries. After they arrive here, they have the chance to apply for special status that eventually leads to a green card.
Then last year in New York, the United States Immigration Services Office began rejecting thousands of applications under this program. But now, a New York district judge has ordered the USCIS to reconsider those applications. Andrea Salcedo reports.
Diego is standing with his mother Marta in their living room in Central Islip, Long Island. Both have asked to be identified by their first names only because they're undocumented. They've been waiting over a year for USCIS to reconsider his application. And now, their lawyer is calling with news.
The judge has given us instructions to be able to reopen Diego's case. And the government is under the order to approve all of the cases if the only reason of the denial was because Diego was older than 18. And that is the case.
Tears stream down Marta's face as she buries her head in Diego's shoulder.
Okay, Diego, do you have any questions?
No, I'm just happy.
Diego is one of 5 plaintiffs in a class action lawsuit brought against the Department of Homeland Security last year after USCIS denied about 3,000 applications in New York. The program allows undocumented young immigrants under 21 who have been abused, neglected, or abandoned by a parent and who would face risk if they return to their home country to apply for a green card. But in early 2018, the administration suddenly and without further notice changed its policy.
And said that for anyone who was between the ages of 18 and 21, they weren't going to recognize SIJ anymore if they were coming out of the New York family court system.
Robert Malionek is one of the attorneys representing the immigrants in the class action lawsuit. He says without a green card, they cannot legally work, get medical insurance, have a driver's license, or get federal financial aid for college.
Even bigger than that, they have to live in fear that they're going to be removed.
Like many young immigrants, Diego, who is now 20, fled gang violence at home. He was living in El Salvador. When he was 15, 2 gang members threatened to kill him outside of school if he did not join them. His father abandoned him when he was a baby. Diego's mother paid $7,000 for him to leave El Salvador and join her in New York. It took him 3 tries to get across the border and reunite with his mother in 2016. A year later, he applied for SIDGE.
Had I not made the journey to the United States, I'd probably be dead by now.
Well, my children risked being killed by the gangs, and I was not going to allow them to die in their hands.
Last week, a district judge ordered the agency to reprocess the applications they denied with the new policy. But Diego still has a long way to go, says his lawyer Vanessa Caicedo.
It's a victory, but there are follow-up steps. If they approve that case, then we have to wait for the next step, which is for my client to apply for his green card.
She says the current backlog in the immigration system could mean years-long wait before Diego gets his green card. Green cards are allocated by country, and the wait list for El Salvador is now 3 years long. It is unclear when the agency will begin reprocessing these applications. We contacted USCIS, and they declined to comment, citing pending litigation. Diego doesn't want to put his life on hold. He's graduating in June, and he has been admitted to Suffolk Community College. He can't apply for federal financial aid, so he's unsure if he can afford it. But even so, he's hopeful for his future.
I'm proud of the person I'm becoming and of what I'm accomplishing.
Diego's lawyers say they're now negotiating with DHS to pen down exactly when they will begin reconsidering his application. Andrea Salcedo, Columbia Radio News.
The City of New York launched a new program last month to help bridge the gender gap in business. We Credit supports women-owned startups with loans and specialized consulting. Cynthia Betubiza reports.
About 30 people crowd into a conference room in Soho. Men are decked out in tailored suits. Women in pencil skirts and sharp blazers. It's pitch day at the Entrepreneurship Lab for Bio and Health, NYC.
We have our next venture pitching, Halo Mountain Therapeutics. Please help me welcome Eleanor.
Eleanor Hagland is the CEO of a startup called Halo Mountain Therapeutics. Hagland's company is in search of a new drug to stop Alzheimer's.
Fighting inflammation and oxidative stress.
The company wants to develop a drug that attacks inflammation in the brain. That's one of the factors that contributes to Alzheimer's. Hagland is 24 years old. It might sound strange that someone so young is dedicated to stopping a disease that affects mostly old people. But for Hagland, it's personal.
So my grandfather developed Parkinson's, my grandmother developed Alzheimer's, and my great-grandmother developed Alzheimer's. So I saw firsthand the effect that these diseases have on people and their families.
For both men and women, the biggest challenge in starting a new business is raising money. But for women, it's even more difficult. A study from the journal Venture Capital found that 97% of investment funds go to companies led by male CEOs. One of the reasons? It's easier for men to make connections in networks that are already dominated by men.
Yes, but I'm probably going to give you some light.
Just a few subway stops uptown from the pitch session, Julia Sokol is showing a new employee around her dance studio. Sokol owns SAS Class. That's a dance studio for women, designed to help them embrace their feminine power. Sokol needs money, too. She opened the studio in 2016. At first, she rented out a dingy space. It helps keep prices low for members. She also relied on her own savings to fund the place.
I worked 7 years in corporate, and I made really good money. And so I felt like I had a really nice cushion under me.
But her cushion deflated fast.
It runs out really quickly when you don't have any more money coming in to replenish it.
In a New York City government survey, 90% of women said that they use their own personal savings to fund their ventures. Sokol wants $100,000 to expand her team and invest in marketing and advertising. She hasn't tried to get an official bank loan yet, but she's found an angel investor, a relative who supports her vision. Right now, Sokol's overwhelmed and a little afraid to start asking strangers and banks for money. And she's not alone.
The thing that I actually have seen with the over 200 women that I've worked with is really actually self-doubt.
That's Allison Gilbert. She's a consultant who helps women entrepreneurs raise money.
There's this invisible challenge that we have with ourselves about how much self-doubt we have and how that holds us back.
All that self-confidence stuff might sound mushy-gushy and sentimental, but it's been quantified in studies. A New York City government survey found that 40% of women said lack of confidence was a significant to moderate barrier in raising capital, while only 31% of men said the same thing. Back at pitch day, a slide goes up during Hagelin's presentation with her big ask: $2.5 million. That's how much Halo Mountain needs to do more studies to prove to the FDA that their drug is safe. Hagelin's one of the youngest people in the room, and one of just a few women. With such high stakes for her company, I ask her, what happens if no one here in this room invests a dime?
In my mind, the worst that could happen is that someone says no, and I suffer a little bit of rejection, and I move on because now I know that that's a door that wasn't open.
And then Hagelin says she can move on to another door and see what's behind it. For Columbia Radio News, Cynthia Betubiza.
Leo Tolstoy once said, all great literature is one of two stories. A man goes on a journey or a stranger comes to town. Hadestown is a new Broadway musical, and it's about both. It debuted earlier this week, and reporter Hannah Critchfield was there.
Once upon a time there was a railroad line.
Welcome to the world of Hadestown.
Don't ask where, brother, don't ask when.
It's a post-apocalyptic dust bowl.
It was a road to hell.
A story about two lovers. It's based on the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. In the original version, Eurydice goes to Hades, or hell, and Orpheus goes after her and makes a deal with the god of the dead. In exchange for allowing Eurydice to return to Earth, Orpheus has to walk in front of her and trust that she's right behind him the whole time. I won't ruin the end just yet. But in this modern version, there's a train.
One of the brilliant things about this show is that it's set on a railway line.
That's Patrick Page. He plays Hades, the god of the underworld, in the musical. He's a bass, if you couldn't tell.
Trains go along a straight track, and when you go to Hadestown, you go straight, and you don't come back.
You need a train ticket to get to Hadestown. And unlike the world above, there's food, because there's work. And there's work because there's a wall to build.
Why do we build the wall?
A wall that keeps out everyone else.
Why do we build the wall? We build the wall to keep us free. That's why we build the wall. We build the wall to keep us free.
Aeneas Mitchell wrote the musical almost a decade ago, but its themes feel especially relevant today.
I find these Greek myths so universal, and that they keep on, sort of refracting light in different ways. It feels like we just are also just unearthing a thing from the ground that already exists.
Hadestown is about transportation, in an esoteric sort of way, about people who can move from town to town, from place to place, and those who can't. Once people do get to Hadestown, they become indentured servants in Hades' factory. In this version, Hades is made human. He's in love with his wife, but their marriage is on the rocks.
In the coldest time of year, why is it so hot down here?
Just like the ancient story, Hades gives Orpheus a chance to take Eurydice back to Earth.
You think they'll make it?
I don't know.
Hades, you let them go.
I'll let them try.
And that is in the original myth. I mean, that is what happens, This boy does this impossible thing.
Aeneas Mitchell again.
He goes to the place no living person has ever gone to, and he sings a song so beautiful that the king of the underworld agrees to let him go under the conditions that he sets.
But here's the other modern day twist. If Orpheus passes the test and doesn't look back, everyone gets to leave Hadestown.
It used to be about what would happen to the two lovers.
That's Mara Isaacs, the producer of Hadestown.
But now it's also what's going to happen to these other people who've been left behind, and is there an out for them as well?
Wait for me, I'm coming.
It is isn't just about Orpheus's journey. It's about how the journeys we take impact others too. In the original version, Orpheus fails. He looks back and loses Eurydice forever. I'm not going to tell you what happens in this version. But the magic of Hadestown is that it creates doubt. We think we know how the story is going to end.
Hermes warns us at the very beginning of the play, look, this is a tragedy.
But is it?
It's a piece of tremendous curiosity that's wildly entertaining. Just a whole hell of a lot of fun.
Hadestown opened on Broadway this week at the Walter Kerr Theater. Hannah Critchfield, Uptown Radio.
According to the New York Department of Health, 1 in 5 kindergartners in the city is overweight. The causes are not a big surprise: lack of exercise and poor eating habits. Alex Coletta visited a school in East Harlem that's trying to fix the problem.
Michael Panetta is the principal of River East Elementary. It seems like he always has a dozen things going on at once.
I have like a sixth sense for when stuff is going on out there.
He's been at the school for 8 years. The last 3 as principal, but he isn't a product of the New York public school system himself. He grew up in Michigan.
When it was nice out, I wasn't allowed to be inside. So like the expectation was you're outside all day and not cooped up in the house.
Things are different in New York City. It's not as common for kids to be outside by themselves. They spend a lot more time indoors.
A lot of my kids go home and just sit in their apartment from 3 o'clock until the next day at school.
The public school system here is the largest in the country. There are over 1 million students, and squeezing them all into the small space that is New York is a difficult task that all public schools face, especially finding room for students to run around and exercise.
Being able to accommodate 2 to 3 periods of gym is really, really challenging.
Couple that with poor nutrition, and you've got serious health concerns. Panetta says he sees students walk in every day with cinnamon rolls, chips, and candy bars for breakfast.
So I think it's just access to spaces for kids to play and the food that a lot of our kids have in their households.
River East Elementary just moved to a new location this year. Now they have access to a full-size gym and a PE teacher, Tim Dimmick. 2 years ago, Dimmick's position didn't even exist. River East shares the gym with another school in the same building, but Dimmick says they're lucky to even have that.
There are other schools where they don't have access to a gym all the time or at all. Yeah, I mean, if I could wave a wand, I'd have a full gym all the time. Sometimes it feels a little crowded, you know, particularly with like the bigger kids and just half a gym.
It's 2:40 in the afternoon and kids are getting out of school. It's been 4 hours since some of them had lunch. Schools like River East Elementary don't have enough cafeteria space, so they have to split kids into separate 20-minute lunch times. Here, K through 2nd grade eat lunch at 10:40 in the morning. Schools are also trying to promote better eating habits. One thing they're doing is called Cook Shop, a program from the Food Bank for New York City. It teaches children and their parents how to cook with healthy ingredients.
The classroom cook shop is broken up into 3 parts.
That's Ville-Mary Bennett. She's been running the program at River East Elementary for 4 years.
So they have where they discover what these particular fruits and vegetables are, and then they explore them. They cut them, they smell them, and then the third one is the actual cook shop where they use those particular ingredients to make whatever it is that's on that menu for that particular class.
Bennett says they do a weekly class with students and a workshop with parents once a month. They have about 8 or 10 families who show up regularly.
They tend to come with their kids, so their kids also tend to eat whatever natural stuff that we're making, whether it's a corn salad or berry mash. I wish more parents would come.
Dimmick, the PE teacher, agrees that parent participation is an important part of the solution. He says that they try to get kids interested in physical activity at school so that they take that behavior home.
Ultimately, you've also got to have the parents and families involved in being sure the kids are active.
Schools are making progress. The childhood obesity rate is going down in the city, but it's going up in adults. According to a recent study by the New York City Health Department and NYU School of Medicine, nearly 1 in 3 adults in New York City is obese. Alex Coletta, Columbia Radio News.
The New York International Auto Show opens today with nearly 1,000 cars on display on the floor of the Javits Center. As Sachi McClendon reports, the big selling point for many of the cars, tech-heavy amenities, and lots of them.
Long gone are the days when your car was simply a tool to get you from point A to point B. Now they're gadgeted out. Paul Waddy is an industry analyst for Auto Pacific. He says that car makers are now adding all kinds of tech amenities to appeal to an important audience, millennials, who make up a growing percentage of car buyers. Waddy points to the previous model of the Subaru Outback to illustrate how important new gear is. He says the car's a bestseller, but that it was missing something.
The biggest deterrent was probably that they lacked some technology.
But according to a press release, Volkswagen says its new Outback features touchscreens, smartphone integration, and even an app with a guide to 400 national parks. According to Waddy, the SUV market is competitive. Car makers have to take any advantage they can get. Waddy says you can see a similar push in Toyota's new Highlander.
And it has a lot more technology, and the interior has really come a long way this generation.
And the crowds agree. At the Javits Center, everywhere you look is a new, shiny car. But Toyota's Highlander is the belle of the ball. Car enthusiasts swarm around, eager to get a look. Maggie Clark, a Toyota specialist, explains exactly what the Highlander is sporting.
It has a new 12.3-inch touchscreen display. There's also wireless charging for your cell phone and an available heads-up display, so it projects how fast you're driving and your turn-by-turn directions onto your windshield.
But some car makers are pushing the amenities even further, way further, like the Carlman King made in Italy. It bills itself as the world's most expensive SUV. It's a huge truck plated in bulky black metal. Fully equipped with a 45-inch screen TV and a PlayStation, the machine goes for over $1.8 million. Sandra Guerrero is a rep for the Carlman King. She's standing right behind the car, ready to field any questions.
It's got 2 seats in the back that will fully recline to a bed. They're massage seats. Everything's automatic. You can change all the colors in the truck. It's got a starlight.
Are those champagne flutes?
Yeah, it's got compartments for champagne bottles and glasses.
But before car makers can get consumers to look inside their cars, they have to attract them with big displays. At the show, there are colorful balloons, plush carpets, and special VIP rooms, off limits to anyone without a pass. But not every automaker is willing to spend the kind of money needed to attract the crowds.
We are seeing automakers reconsider their participation in auto shows.
That's Michelle Kreb. She's an auto analyst. She says BMW decided to opt out this year.
We're heading into a bit of a dip in auto sales, and so budgets are tightening.
Still, today's show is packed. Krebs says it's because the show offers a chance for consumers to shop without being tailed by a car salesman. Sachi McClendon, Columbia Radio News.
According to the State Department, there are now over 1 million international students in colleges and universities across the U.S. But before they're admitted, most prospective students are required to take the Test of English as a Foreign Language, or TOEFL. It's designed to measure English proficiency. But as Shannon Lin reports, there are concerns the test might not be an accurate assessment.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
It's a Saturday night. Members of Columbia University's Taiwanese Graduate Student Association are at a hot pot restaurant in Flushing. They're crowded around a small wooden table piled with bright orange plates of fish balls, sliced beef, and raw vegetables. They take selfies and trade gossip in their native Mandarin. As she cooks a piece of beef, Victoria Yang opens up about her struggle, one that's familiar to the group, trying to keep up in class when everything is in English.
While I scored pretty high on the TOEFL, I can only understand a third of what my teachers are saying. 70% of the time, I'm guessing.
Yang studies data science, which she says she chose because coding doesn't require as much English. Like the other students here tonight, Yang passed the TOEFL, but she says her score doesn't accurately reflect her English proficiency. Across the room, Yating Yang, no relation to Victoria, is cooking a piece of tofu. She says it's impossible to measure someone's language proficiency in just 4 hours.
I think TOEFL in general is not a test that tests your ability. It's more about testing strategies. So if you know how to do good on the test, then you can score very high, but that doesn't mean that you're good at English or anything. You're just good at taking the test.
And prospective students like Victoria and Yating spend thousands of dollars on test prep. According to the financial consulting firm EY Parthenon, last year, China's test prep industry was worth about $1.7 billion. But experts and students alike are concerned that the TOEFL is a test you can study for, but doesn't prepare you for studying English in America. Robin Harvey teaches multilingual studies at NYU. She says the TOEFL provides limited information about students' English ability.
Language assessment exams are really good at testing how you respond to questions on a language assessment exam.
Harvey says the TOEFL doesn't factor in cultural nuances.
There's one person speaking to you in measured tones, at an appropriate pace, and you have a chance to respond. So that's very different from a classroom environment.
Teachers often use conversational English. Some speak fast or might have accents, which leaves foreign students struggling. According to a 2016 article published in the Journal of International Students, there's a lack of research measuring how foreign students perform in U.S. classrooms. Deborah Croissant is a former board member of TESOL International Association, a nonprofit that teaches English to non-native speakers. She says though the TOEFL has its problems, it's the best option.
The way you should test speaking proficiency would be at least to have two raters rate people face to face. But do you know how expensive that would be? And how would you do it all over the world?
The Educational Testing Service, which administers the TOEFL, did not respond to requests for comment. Back in Flushing, Victoria Yang says getting into an American university was easy. Now the challenge is to keep up.
It's easy to get a very high score, but it's not usable. My English is still, I cannot write and I cannot speak.
With 1 year left till she graduates and has to find a job, Yang says she's working hard outside of class, listening to podcasts and watching American shows to pick up on the slang that never appeared on her TOEFL exam. Shannon Lin, Columbia Radio News.
In another of our commentary series, reporter Bianca Giacobone remembers what it's like to have a teenage obsession and what it means to let it go.
One November night over a decade ago, I was watching the European MTV Music Awards on TV. Someone had told me that to be a proper teenager, you had to be obsessed by some kind of band. I wasn't. I had listened to Green Day for 4 weeks straight without success, and I was wondering, as teenagers do, about what was wrong with me. Why didn't I really like any band at all? As I was moping, a bunch of pale, nervous-looking guys took the stage, and this happened.
They're gonna clean up your looks with all the lies in the books to make a citizen out of you.
The song is appropriately called Teenagers. The band is called My Chemical Romance, and it all went downhill from there. I hit the obsessed teenager mark hard. It was like falling in love. I couldn't think or listen to anything else. The band became the fixture of my life. My room was soon plastered with faces of dudes wearing heavy eyeliner. I started wearing heavy eyeliner. It had the tendency to run down my face, and I looked like a panda most of the time. I traveled to Amsterdam, Vienna, New York, Prague, and Berlin to see them live. I knew their birthdays. April 9th for the singer, same day as the French poet Baudelaire. Their pets' names, the guitarist had a chihuahua named Sweet Pea, it died recently. Their tattoos, the medications they were on, and I knew all their lyrics. I spent a shameful amount of hours translating them with a pocket-sized blue dictionary. It did miracles for my English. I went from barely stuttering hello to knowing uncanny sentences by heart. Things like, black is the kiss, the touch of a serpent's sun, or one day I'll leave you a phantom to lead you in the summer to join the black parade. They're weird, I know, but I love them. It's hard to say why I liked them so much. We had nothing in common. They were 5 losers from the suburbs in New Jersey singing about things like booze, sin, and suicide. I was a clean-cut little girl from the center of fashionable Milan, but I felt like they were the only ones who got me. I led 2 separate lives, one with friends, crushes, and good marks, one with mysterious angst and sad lyrics. New Jersey, where they were from, felt so exotic for a European city girl like me. Something I only seen in movies. The 2-story wooden houses with grass in front, the barbecues, basement parties, and lukewarm beer in red plastic cups. When we drove through it during a trip to Maine with my parents, I spent the whole time with my nose plastered to the minivan window, staring at backyard fences like they held the meaning of life. Growing up is a lonely business. Everything is changing, and I wanted everything to stop. I imagine in my adult life, everything would stay the same forever. My home, my friends, and my band. They split up when I was 20, 5 long years ago. I cried for an entire afternoon, writing a corny goodbye letter to the singer, and my parents were very amused. I still listen to them sometimes, but it's not the same. They're not my fixture anymore. It's like Christmas for an adult, without the magic. I lost them. It was sad. But it's okay, because the one thing I did not know then, and I think I'm starting to know now with all my 25 years old wisdom, is that adult life comes with change. You change your best friends, you lose your childhood bedroom and get a 1-bedroom apartment in New York City. You lose everyday life with your parents and get one with your boyfriend instead. Everything keeps moving forward. Even my band knew that when they sang these words, I still can't quite let go of.
We'll say goodbye today.
Bianca Giacobone, Columbia Radio News.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our executive producer today was Rebecca Ward. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Hannah Critchfield.
Director Sophia Amati coordinated our studio production team with Lauren Lantry and Alex Coletta.
Our web producer Allie Swenson got this stream live to the web. Shannon Lynn and Stephanie Horton produced the news. Senior editor Maddie Foley and assistant editor Andrea Salcedo led our copy team.
Our instructors Joanne Farian, Sally Herships, and Ben Shapiro advised our staff, along with Acacia O'Connor. I'm Maggie Green.
And I'm Camille Peterson. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4. Until next time, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.